The core experience of any modern interactive app is the CRUD functionality: create, read, update, and delete. And that's what we've got today in this ToDo React app. Now we're going to go beyond just kind of building it out. I'm going to talk you through how to build components from scratch, how to pass props, how to deal with state both locally and then pass it between components. We're going to look at importing some libraries just for the icons so that we can do most of the code ourselves. Then we'll also talk a lot about accessibility and how it's important for you, even when you're learning React or other frameworks, to remember accessibility from the very start. We will talk some about CSS, although I'll have you just copy and paste code in, and that's an important reminder for me, which is in the description down below. You'll find a link to a GitHub, and you can just go in there and find whatever lesson you're on. There's going to be 7 in this video, and so you can just go find whatever lesson you're on, and when you're there, you can download the code, you can unzip it, open it up in VS Code or whatever your code editor of choice is, and then jump right in with me. If you get stuck at any time as well, you can do that, and all the style sheets that I'll have you copy and paste are also going to be found in those code links down below. Now, if you ever jump in at any point from a downloaded code that you need to kind of get up and running, you can just open it up in your code editor and then run pnpm-i, which will install all the node modules, and then you can type pnpm run dev, and that should run it and get a local server up and running for you. Now, like I mentioned, the CSS style sheets and even the CSS modules, the scoped modules we'll talk about, all of that is going to be copied from the GitHub link so that we can stay focused on React and not on writing CSS. At the very end of the course, I'll show you how to write your own custom hook to read and write data to your local storage. That means whenever you return to this project, it'll remember all of your to-dos so that you can jump right in. Now, all 7 lessons are broken up down below with time markers so you can jump around or come back to the project when you need to. If you get stuck at any point, please let me know. I'm really excited to build this out with you. Now, one final note before we jump in. As you can already see, I can add tasks and update tasks and delete tasks, but down below you're going to see that there's some theming options as well. Now, we're not actually going to cover that in this video. If you're interested in that, make sure you subscribe, because next week I plan to release the video showing how I included those components down below. And just like the local storage here for my tasks, my theming and the dark and light mode is all remembered when I come back to this project using that same custom hook that we're going to write in this project. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in. Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. We're going to get started here in the very first section of this video with the simple setup and installation of React. We're going to use something called Vite to do it, and I'm actually going to use PNPM instead of NPM. Now, if you're interested in PNPM and why I might choose it over NPM, I've done a video explaining it and how to get started with PNPM, but it comes actually installed when you install Node itself, but you can also update it independently and run it. The basic reason is speed. All right, here we go. So I'm going to come in here and PNPM create Vite React to do is what we're going to call this. So PNPM create Vite is the command to create a Vite project, and then React to do is just the name of the folder that I'm going to create. If you don't put that to start with, it'll ask you what to name it here, but since I've already done that, now it's simply asking me which framework to use. We're going to use React and just plain old React. All right, then I can CD into it. So CD React to do, just like that. And then PNPM install, or I works just as well. That will install everything and get the project ready to go. All right, you can see it's installed everything already. So now all I'm going to do is open it. So I'm going to do code dot and open this and get it set up and ready. I'll be right back with you. All right, so I've got VS Code open on the left to that directory we created, and on the right, I've just got an empty Chrome window. So what I'm going to do is come in here and just open this up. And if I were to come into this package.json, you'll see that Vite itself actually set up some scripts for me, one of them being this dev script. So I'm going to say pnpm run dev, just like that, and it should get a server up and running, and it does. So let me click over here, and here it is. So Vite plus React, we're ready to go. Now, if you've used Create React app before, one of the major things that frustrated me when I started using it is it's just really, really slow. And one of the best things about Vite is that it's crazy fast. In fact, that's what it means. Vite means fast in French, I think. All right, so here we are. We've got this SRC folder, and let's just kind of take a quick survey before we jump into actually building out this app. So you see that everything is going to come into this main.jsx file, and I'll go ahead and hide that. So here you go right here. And everything is being dumped into a single div. This is how React works right here. So the script tag is dumping everything we're going to build directly into this div. All right, and then you can see if I move back over this way, the thing it's dumping in is a component called app. It's also importing CSS in this index.css file, which we're going to actually update and get rid of and do a bunch of stuff with here. So here's this app.js file, and you can see that what we're doing here is it's returning, this function is returning this JSX, which looks a lot like HTML. Except you can template in it, like here. You can see we've got these this template kind of string here showing up, and that's coming from this React logo up top, which is an asset that we've imported. We're also using some custom functions that come with React, like count and set count. These come from useState. So useState is the function, and then you can just name the two things you get back, and we'll talk about that as we get going. All right, let's go ahead and let's remove a few things because we know we're not going to need them, and that will help us as we get started. So let's remove all of that. We know we're not going to need that. I'm actually going to remove this as well. We can leave the use state there. We'll use that eventually. Let's remove this app.css. We won't need that. I'll go ahead and delete that. And let's see, I think that should be it. We should be up and ready to start. Okay, so then for the next lesson, we'll actually start building out the task form. Here in lesson 2, we're going to add our task form. But before we do that, let's do a little bit of kind of just maintenance to get started. So to start with, I'm going to come into our index.html page. Let's change this to something like my to-do list or something like that, just so it pulls that up. Also, since we're no longer pointing to this SVG, I'm going to get rid of this. You do need some kind of favicon if you want. You can put that in yourself, but I'm not pointing to anything in particular here. Okay, next, let's come into our main.jsx, and you'll notice that we're getting everything imported into this style sheet. Now, because I want to make this about React and not CSS, and it would easily double the length of this series to type all of this out, I'm actually going to paste most of the CSS we're going to use for the entire project directly in this index.css file. I'm going to go ahead and paste this in. Now, where can you get this? Well, you can get it in the GitHub repo. You can see it's 243 or 42 lines of code here. So you can just grab that directly from lesson 2 branch or any of the ones past that, and that will also work for you. Just copy it, drop it straight into here. Let's see, should I talk through this? Let me talk through it, and I'll leave a kind of a timestamp below that you can jump to. Okay, so if I come up top here, you'll see that what we've got here is a basic clear. I've also cleared for the buttons and the labels. And then I've got a bunch of kind of theming variables. So a hue color that I'm going to use for the entire site. We've got a size variable that, again, we'll use for the entire site. Radiuses, these are some transition controlling variables. And then I set up light mode, dark mode, and then set these up for preferring the color scheme unless they've selected something different with dark and light mode. Now, like I said, in this kind of first section of the videos, I'm not going to be going over all of that just to not overcomplicate things, so we won't actually get to using this until later. You can see, though, I've got a couple other things, like I've got a media screen that resizes the fonts at smaller screen sizes, and then if they don't want reduced motion, or if they don't want motion, I can reduce that here by changing out the speed variables. Everything else is pretty basic, I think. We've got body that just sets everything in the center and sets a new font family and sets our colors so that either light or dark mode should work for us. I'm also changing the selection as well so that everything feels a little bit more themed. H1 is just setting font sizes. This container puts everything in the very center. This header row is what's going to divide the tasks from the top section. Then I've got some utility classes here for buttons. So we've got a nice little box shadow effect when you hover or when you tab to it as well. That'll actually pop out and you can kind of see a ring around it. And that's what all of that is about. When I come down to this section down here, these labels and wrappers, all of this is for that form so that as you click into it, you get a nice ring that pops out as well. Same thing with this input as well. When you click into here, we move this box shadow on focus all the way out so you can see it. We also move the input label up above. And again, if you're interested in how I did all of this, I did a video explaining this not too long back on my channel about how to create like a better form experience by default. When I come down here, this dialog is going to be what we use to pop up that edit form. And so if you're interested in that, you can just read through this code here. So I've given it a role of dialog, and whenever it's open, and we have a to-do in it here, it's showing what that to-do should look like, and we have a nice box shadow around that pop-up form that we're going to use. So that's the CSS. Again, if you're interested in any of that, you can look through it. If you have questions, let me know, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on that in this project. That will basically cover most of the CSS we're going to need in this project. All right, let's go ahead and close that CSS file down. Now we should be set to go. We have yet to really do a whole lot with it, but that's okay. I'm going to close that down too, and let's close down the index.html page. We also don't need this package.json. All right, so the very first thing I'm going to do is we're going to create a separate component and dump it directly in here. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open up the sidebar here, and under SRC, I'm going to come in here and say components, just like that. And then let's create something. Let's call this like custom form.jsx. All right, there is an extension that's super helpful. If I come over here and look for React, it should pull this up. So this ES7 React snippets, that will help things go a lot faster for you when you're learning React, just because you don't have to manually type stuff out. So if I come in here instead, say like RAFC, you can see it's going ahead and pulling that in for me. So if I type that in, it'll just drop it in directly here. Now it actually includes this React from React, which you no longer need as long as it's up in your, I think it's in your main.js. Yeah, so it's pulling it in here. So that's all you need anymore in React. So I can get rid of this. And in fact, to simplify that for myself, I've just created my own snippet here, and you can see it does the exact same thing. If you're interested in how I did that, I'm happy to do a video on showing how to create your own custom snippets in VS Code. I don't think I've done that before on the channel. Okay, so what do we want to return from here? Well, we want to return a form. So let's go ahead and change those tags to say form. And let's give this a class. And in React, you give it class name rather than class, since class is a reserved word. We'll just give this the class of ToDo. Now we're going to have a couple other things on here as well. So let's pull this down. The next thing I'm going to have is an onSubmit function. And right now we'll point this to nothing for now. Well, let's point it to like handle form submit. And let's just put it up top here, just so we've got kind of a placeholder ready to go. And I'll make this an arrow function as well. And this will, for now, just console.log the E. Actually, what we should do is probably e.prevent default. In other words, when you normally refresh a form, it actually refreshes the whole page when you submit a form. What we're going to do is say, hey, we'll handle it all ourselves. Browser, don't figure it out for us. Just prevent that default. So we've got that set and ready to go. We can add to that here in a little bit. And I think that actually might be it for now on the form. All right, so down below here, the way we've got these classes set up in our HTML, we actually need to wrap them together. So what we're going to do is create a div with the class of wrapper, just like that. Now, I'm actually using Emmet directly in here. And if you're wondering how to do that, if I come over here and open up my settings, let's check for Emmet. If I come down here, yeah, here it is. So you can actually add the item JavaScript and the value JavaScript React, and that will allow Emmet to work in that as well. So they actually give you that as one of the examples. So that would be another kind of nice tip for you as you're learning React. Okay, so I've got this wrapper ready. Now, in order to see any of this, let's go ahead and import it into our app.js file. So what I'm going to do is come in here and grab my form. Let's see, what was it? Custom form. Yeah, here we go. So if you actually get onto this IntelliSense here and hit tab, it should import it up top for you automatically, which it does. I'll go ahead and close that right here. And then I like to come in here and actually kind of comment these out. So I could say something like custom components, and that just helps you stay more organized as you get going. So if I save this here, technically we have our form coming in over here, even though you can't see it. All right, so, but if I came in here and said like H1 hi, he, hi, that'll work. Just like that, that should work. In fact, before we do too much more, let's change out one thing here. So this div here, we're going to change this to a class of container, and that will help our styling to all take effect. And then I actually want a header tag up here, and this is just going to be an H1 here that says my task list. All right, so that should show up there, and now everything else we're actually going to put inside here, all inside this container div, which is kind of our wrapper for the entire project. All right, so I've got that set. Let's move back over here to the form, and inside here, inside this wrapper, we're going to have two things. We'll have the input, first of all, and then we'll also have the label. Now, the way I've got these two things interacting in the CSS means that as I were to select this input, this label will actually move up above everything else. And again, because I've covered all of that in the CSS, we don't have to worry about that right now. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and space this out so it's a little easier to see what's going on here. And we're going to add several attributes here to the input. So we've got a type of text, and that's just fine. I want to give this an ID of task, so I can point my label to it, and the two can be connected in the HTML. And then for the class, I want to give it a class name of input. All right, next, I've got a value here, and we're going to point this to a piece of state called task. I'll explain that in a second, so let's go ahead and comment that out for now. And then let's go ahead and also write an onInput function, just like this. And for now, well, it's not too difficult, so let me just type this out. What we're going to do is take the event, so whatever is being typed in, each keystroke as it's typed in, we're going to set the task, which is this function that updates our piece of state over here. And again, I'll explain that in a second, to e.target.value. Okay, so we've got that set and ready, and again, I'm going to comment that out, and we'll come back to that. All right, next, we want this to be required because you can't submit the form without it, so let's do that. And then I also want it to be autofocus. Now in React, sometimes you'll have these properties where you have to camel case them, and this is one of those. Don't worry if you forget, it'll actually throw up a warning, so you can't really mess it up. You just type in what you're used to. Normally this would be auto focus like that, but that's not how it's done in React. So auto focus like that. And then let's give it a max length just so that these things don't get too long. So they shouldn't be able to type in more than like 60 characters, and I can add it in just like that. Now I think that's everything except for a placeholder. So let's add a placeholder next. So placeholder. And I just want this to say enter task. Now it's actually going to be hidden by default. In fact, you can see I can't see it right there. And that's because we're going to use the same name for our label down here. So if I remove that here, just like that, this will eventually be in the middle once I give it the class, and then it will move up above. And we're just using this placeholder to basically figure out where we should put the label. Again, if you're interested in that, I'll let you peer into the CSS or check out my video I did on creating your own custom form inputs. Now this HTML4 needs to point to the ID of the input it's connected to, which is task. So let's go ahead and do that. And let me space this out just a touch as well to make it a little bit easier to read. All right, next we've got a class name, and this one we're just going to give the name of label to. You can see now it moves up top there, and as I click in here, it moves up above, and that's because of the CSS that we added at the beginning of this section. All right, so I'm going to move below the wrapper here. We're going to add one final thing, and that is a button. We're going to give this a class name of button, just like that. And then inside here, this will just have an icon, and I'll show you how to import that in a second. But for now, let's add a couple other things here. And again, I'm going to space this out just to make it a little bit easier to read and follow along. So we'll give this an ARIA label here so that they know what this thing does. And weirdly enough, for React, with ARIA label, you do give it a dash. It's not camel cased. And do I know why? No, I don't. All right. So we'll come in here and say add task. That way, if assistive technology is trying to figure out what this button does, and you come over here and you select it, it says, hey, add task button. And now you know what it does. All right, finally, I want this to be a type of submit. Now, it should be by default anyhow in a form. This button should submit it, but it's always good to add that explicitly. All right, so let's go ahead and save that, and you see it's right over here. The problem is we don't actually have any icon in the middle, so that's what I want to add next because it will give us a chance to work with the library in React. So let me come over here, and we're just going to look for hero icons. And while I can just copy out the JSX if I want to, again, let's use this as more like a typical library with React. So I'm going to come to the documentation, and if I scroll down, it talks you through this. So we're going to install this right here. I'm just going to add P to the front of this to make it P npm. Let's pull this up right here, and we'll say P npm hero icons React, so that should install for us. Now you can see what you can do is you just grab an imported icon from hero icons, and then you dump it in here, and you can pass it attributes like class name and whatever else you want. So I'm going to import it right here, and let's go ahead and import it up top. And then just to use their example, let's copy this out, and I will add it in down here in this button section. So we'll do that. Let's also come in here and say pnpm run dev to get that up and going again, and I'll close that down. Come back over here, it should be set, and there's my beaker. Okay, perfect. Now, one of the things I like about hero icons is it sets the current color of the stroke or the fill to whatever the color of the button is, so that as we change and update this button, it'll actually change and update this for us over here, which is great. Okay, so we don't want a beaker though. Let's come over here. What I want is like a plus icon, I think. Yeah, right here. So this is called plus. So if I come up top here and I start to type, it may not be named the exact same thing, but you can see as I start to type plus icon. That looks right. So let's grab that, and I'm going to drop it in here. And I've actually controlled all of this CSS with this button class up here as well, so I don't think I need to do anything. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so there it is. We can type in stuff, and I can only get to 65 characters because of this max length we set up top here, or 60 characters, I guess. So that's as long as the task will allow us to be. And then I can click here, and if I don't have anything, it tells me to fill it out because we've said it is required. Now, before we do too much more, let's talk about this state right here. So I'm going to go ahead and comment this out, and let's update the state. Let's add some state. So up top here, so let's type const, and then we're going to destructure two values that we're going to get as return values from a function we're going to use from React called useState. So we'll say task and then set task. All right, and then I'm going to point this to useState, just like that, and right now we'll just point it to an empty string. All right, so here it is, and let's see, it's yelling at us because we did not import it, I'm guessing. So before we look, let's just see if that's the problem. So we'll say import, and then use state from React, just like that. And then let's organize these a bit. So we'll say like library imports. Okay, So here we go, and you can see now it is working. And just to show you how this all works, maybe let me come above this wrapper. And what I'll do is add another paragraph tag and insert here task, like that. Okay, so what we're doing is we're using this use state hook from React. Now, React has a bunch of functions. Think about them as like helper functions that will allow you to more quickly spin up a UI. In this case, this use state one is really important because it allows you to store values in React, in the actual React code, that you can then manipulate, update, delete, react to, all that kind of stuff. And when you do that, it gives you 2 items back. So you can name them whatever you want. Typically, you name one, whatever the thing is, and the second thing you say set, and then the same thing, whatever it is. And that's just convention, the way you should do it, because it helps you keep track of each thing as you start to add more and more state throughout your project. Now, if I were to come over here, I can open up the DevTools, and I'll do that here. If I refresh, it gets rid of all those errors. Let me come in here and I'm going to open up this components. Now, if you don't see this, you just need to search for React DevTools online for whatever browser you're using. I'm using Chrome here, and just install the DevTools, and then you should see it here on your project. Now you can see what I've got is all of these separate components or functions here. You can see this import is showing as its own thing. And as I click on this, it tells me certain things like the state. Now, if you don't see the name, like I don't here, you can parse the hook names. And you can see here that it's saying the state is count. And here it is, it's set to 0 to start with. That's from the app. Now for the custom form, if I did the same thing, this is called task, and it's set to an empty string by default, which we know. So as I come in here and I start typing like hi, all right, a couple of things are going to happen. You'll notice that down here, it updates the state. And number 2, you can see right here, it's actually inputting hi. Why is it doing that? Well, just a second ago, I said, hey, show the state of task inside a paragraph tag. Now, there was no paragraph tag. The paragraph tag had nothing in it because it was an empty string before, so you couldn't see it before. And if I were to delete this and remove that state, you can see it removes that, and it removes that down there. Now, if I come all the way down here, let's remove this just so you know now how that all works. And if I were to come all the way down here, you see we're doing a couple of things. I am showing the value as the task. So by double binding it like this, you're ensuring that your state is correct. If I were to come over here and look at my elements now and select this right here, let's watch this input right here. So if I start to type here like hi, you'll notice that the value here updates automatically to be the same thing as whatever I'm typing in. Now again, you might say, well, isn't that how normal HTML works? But React actually has a virtual DOM that it's keeping track of separately. So by actually setting the value explicitly to what I'm typing, and then every time I type, updating that value, it ensures that everything is up to date so that when it actually does put out an actual DOM here in the browser, everything is correct. All right, hopefully that all makes sense. Let's go ahead and close this down for now and move this over. We're going to do one more thing in this section, and that is we've got to actually handle this form submit. So for now, I've just prevented the default and console.logged the submit event. I want to actually do 2 other things inside of here before we close down this section. First of all, I want to add the task using a function we're going to pass down from the app component. And then secondly, I want to reset the task state to an empty string. So that way when we submit, the form goes blank again. So we can say set task. This is the easy one, and we just set it to an empty string. Now, that should work. In fact, if I were to come over here, start typing, and I submit by hitting the enter button, now it goes like that. Now, one quick note, you might be asking, why are we doing an on submit here rather than doing like an event listener on the button on the form? This is just how HTML works best. You always do HTML, JavaScript, you always use the submit for the form, and that will actually capture the button as well. So if I were to come in here and type and then click this, the same event is fired. All right, so anytime you submit, whether it's using the button, the keyboard, or anything else, it'll actually submit and run that function here on the on submit. Okay, so that's just kind of standard use for HTML and JavaScript, but this is how you do it in React, is attach it to one of these submit forms. Okay, so let me come back over here. And what I want to do is actually write a function in this top level, this parent component, and pass it down. And that's because some of the items we're going to be using in this function are going to be needed in other components that we write. So that's the best way to do all that. So let me come in here, and the next thing I'm going to do is write a function, and maybe let's make this an arrow function, and we're going to call this add task. All right, it's going to take in a task, and for now, all I want to do is console.log the task. All right, now, in order to pass this down, I need to come down to my custom form, and I need to pass this in as a function. So I could do this like on submit or something like that, but since I already have a submit function in there, I'm just going to pass it down as add task. That's what I'll call it, and I'll pass it in add task. This now means that this custom form has access to this function that we wrote in the parent component. So I'll come back over here. How do we get it in here? Well, the way we accept props, that was passing props. The way we accept props is we can do it in a couple different ways. We could come over here and we could say props dot and then figure out what we need. But the way you typically do it is you destructure this. So it's an object that it gives you. So I can destructure from this certain items. And one of those things in the object is the function I just passed down. So what I'm going to do is simply write add task. And now I have access to this. So if I come over here, I can now add task. And what I can do is just console.log the E, because all this add task thing does is console.log. That should work. So if I come over here, let's pull up the console just to see it. If I say hi and I input it, synthetic event. So it fires the entire thing. And if I were to come down here somewhere, it's going to say hi. What we need to do is actually pass in the actual task we want to update. So what we're going to do is actually pass in an object just like this. And we're going to have a few things here on the object. First of all, we want a name of the task. And that name would simply be whatever the task is. So we'll just type in task, and this will be this piece of state when we hit submit on the form. Next, I want to pass in whether or not it's checked. And by default, whenever I start a new task or add a new task, it should always be false. This is the Boolean, so we'll just pass that in as false. And then lastly, I need an ID, something unique to this task, because you could technically have two things named the same thing, and you'll certainly have several things checked as false and several things checked as true. So I want to make sure that I have something that's truly unique to this. So I'm going to do ID. And in this case, since it's just a single app and it's not like pushing to a database or anything, we can get a unique value just by doing date.now. And this will actually give us the milliseconds from January 1st, 1970. So it should be different unless you can do two submissions within a millisecond. I think you should be safe here. So we've got all those set now. Now if I refresh and I come over here, let's add this. So I'll say like hi. And you can see now I'm getting those three things. So I'm getting checked, false, ID, that's however many milliseconds it's been, and the name of hi. So now I'm prepared to accept that and actually add that to a task list. And that's what we're going to do in the next section. All right, we are in lesson 3 now, and if you need the code for any of this, you can jump into the GitHub repo and just go ahead and download the code for lesson 3. But you can see here that what we set up last time, if I pull up my console here, is as we type in anything here and we hit submit, now we get this all popping in over here. Now what we want to do is actually do something valuable with this, and then we want to display it down here inside of a task form area. Now, in order to do that, what we need to do is actually have some kind of state that's shared by everything in this app component. And that piece of state we're simply going to call tasks. So let me come in here and let's change both of these to tasks. And then to start with, we're going to just set this, I guess, to it like an empty array. Now, when I come down here, what I want to do is when I add a task, I actually want to add it to that array. So what we're going to do is use the setTasks function to update the state of tasks. And whenever you have a reference value like an array or an object, you need to actually start by passing in the previous state. So the first thing the setTasks, or whatever the updating function is that we'll take, is the previous state. So you can call this whatever you want, but previous state is a pretty easy thing to call it. Then you can actually pass it and say, hey, update that previous state with adding my new thing to it. So in this case, what we would do is, because it's an array, we would spread in the previous state. So we want to make sure that we get in anything that's already there, and then we're simply going to tack on our task to the end of it. So there we go. And in fact, if I were to come up here, and let's grab this right here. Well, actually, let's just pull up the console because that'll be easier. Let's look at the components here. If it will let me, components, there we go. And we're going to look at the app itself because that's where the state is. The state is right here. So there we go, our tasks. So what I want to do is now I want to add this task to the array of tasks. Now there's nothing in it right now. It's just an empty array. But if I type hi and then I enter it, you can now see that I've got something in here. And you can see it's checked, false, ID, whatever, name, hi. If I say hi2, like that, now I got hi2 down here. So it's actually adding it to the state itself. Perfect. So what I want to do now is take this state that's been added and I want to actually display it down below. Now, the way that this whole thing works is the very first time this runs, it's going to actually look at this and set all this state to nothing. So if I try to run and show things on nothing, I'm going to get some errors. So I can't just display the tasks to start with. I have to actually wait till a task is added or until we load it from local storage, which we'll do in a future video. For now, what I'm going to do is just come down here. If that didn't make sense, I think it will as we get going here. But I want to say that I want the tasks, and only once they exist, then I want to pass all the tasks to something I'm simply going to call a task list, just like that. Now, this doesn't exist yet, so it should yell at me if I save it. So let's try not to save it. I'm going to come over here to my components, and let's go ahead and add a task list module.jsx. All right, and then over here, I'm going to use my little snippet that I wrote just to speed stuff up, and so I don't have to remove the top thing, and that should be good. Let's just call this like task list to start with, and then let me move back over here, and up top here, let's add not just the custom form, but hitting Command D to grab both of those, I'll add my task list as well. So I'll import both of those, save that, and now my task list is showing up there. Okay, so what do I want to do? Well, whenever I update the state, I want to display that state down here in this task list, which means I need to pass it something. What would I need to pass it? Well, I would need to pass it the actual tasks, right? So let's do that. So I'll say tasks, and then I'm going to pass it my tasks, like that. So now it has access to that piece of state. So if I come back over here, I can accept that, remember, either by doing props dot, or I can just destructure that and simply grab the tasks. So now what I should be able to do is that gives me a whole list of tasks. Now, how do I actually loop over these? Well, for now, let's go ahead and first of all, change this UL tag here. And I'm going to give this a class name. We're going to do something a little bit different. We've done a kind of a basic style sheet before. Now what we're going to do is actually import a module. And I'll show you the difference here in a second. But generally speaking, what we're going to do is name everything we get from that module with something, some import name. And we're going to call that styles. And then we'll give it a dot. And this now points it to whatever item is within that file. I'll show you that again here in just a second. For now, just know that we're going to point to our styles.tasks. And it's not going to know what to do with that, so it should yell at us, and it does. But what we're going to do is loop over now, and this is how you do templating in React, is with these curly brackets, which is pretty common for a lot of these templating languages. What I want to do is take the tasks, and then I want to dot map over them, and I want to pass it the task. And then inside here, what we're going to do is pass each of these tasks to another component. In other words, each of these single items is going to be its own component. And then we're just going to call this task item, just like that. And we will pass it a couple of things. Whenever you're looping over things with a map, you need to always give it a value called key, and it has to be called that. And this basically makes it easy for React to update this particular component, this instance of the component. So what we're going to do is pass it a unique value. Now think about the things we have. We have the checked, the name, and the ID. Which one of those is unique? It's the task.id. All right, and then let's go ahead and pass it the task as well, which will just be the entire task, and we'll do a couple other things as we get going. But at least for now, that should be a good start. Now, let's think about these styles before we do too much more. So let me come up top here, and what I want to do is, first of all, import task item, which will be the component we write in a second here from, and this will be in the same directory, task item. And again, we don't have that yet, so it should yell at us, but let's go ahead and just add a comment here that says something like component import. And then let's add some styles here. So styles, and what I want to do is import a module. Now, why might we choose to use a module rather than just a standard CSS file? Well, a standard CSS file in React is, by default, it's global. In fact, I think in one of my last videos, when I watched it, I realized that I said it wasn't, that it was scoped to the component, which is not true. All right, these styles instead, this module, though, is scoped to this particular component. So if I import styles from, what will end up being task list.module.css, now what you're going to see is that these styles right here that are being pulled in are going to be scoped to this component, meaning that React will actually attach some kind of unique identifiers to it, so it can only be used, the styles I pass in here, only with this component. So I've talked a lot about things that aren't in existence yet, so let's make them in existence. All right, I'm going to come over here first of all, and we'll say new file, and here I just want task item.jsx, and then I also want to come in here and add one more thing, which would be task list.module.css. And I'll add both of those in here. So let's first of all come to the task item right here, and let's scaffold this out. Again, I'm going to use my shortcut here. You can use whatever you want. And I know I'm going to get two values in here. The key I don't need at all, but I do need the task. So I'm going to go ahead and pull in the task. And what I'm going to do is just output the task dot. And remember, we've got three properties: ID, name, and checked. So what I want is just the name. So I've got that set. That's good. Now this components, let me go ahead and paste in the styles for this. All right, and I've actually put everything I need for both the task list and the task item inside this one module, which isn't technically best practice, but I don't want to constantly be pasting in stuff that you're not going to see, so I'd rather just do it twice here in the standard CSS file and now here. So if you want to see, basically I'm just listing these out in a grid. Each of the items themselves, they're going to have their name on the left, so they're flex, and then all the other things like, let's see, the checkbox and all that will be left. The delete button is going to be on the right, And we also have an edit button that will be over on the right as well. So that's what all this stuff does. And again, you can grab this from lesson number 3 in the description down below and just paste this in yourself. Okay, so with that set, I'm going to come over here and save this. And now we should actually get something working. Let me come back over here and let's add like hi. And now we should get hi coming in. Let me just come over here to the console, see if I got any errors. Hi. No. All right, let's see what's going on. So I'm going to pull up the components again. We're going to look at our custom form. Let's see the app itself. Let's start there. So I do have this task. It is coming in down here. It gets passed to the form or the task list. That's what I want. And it should be getting that. Good. All right, but task item from task item. Do I have this task item doing anything? I don't actually see it in the component tree here, which means for some reason it's not loading. So let's come over here and just make sure that that's the case in the HTML. I should not see anything inside this UL, and I don't. But notice here how this class has been given all this unique identifier here, and that's because it's a module, whereas these classes here that are not modules are just basically global default styles for everything. So that helps to know the difference between those two. All right, let's come back over here and figure out what's going on. So if I come in here to my task list, all right, task list pulls in the tasks, and it loops through these tasks inside of here. All right, and you may have seen what I've already done, but you can see here that what I've done is surrounded this with curly brackets. Now, that's one of the things that messed me up because I'm used to writing arrow functions here, not thinking about mapping. And so if I do that, that should change things. All right, so now what I'm doing is returning this here from this map, which is the task item with the task right here. So if I come in here and type hi, there we go. All right, so now it's coming through. All right, and if I open this back up, you should be able to see that in the component tree as well. So if I come over here, yeah, here's the task item, and notice that it's got its key, its unique identifier for React, to be able to update just this little piece of state if I need to, rather than updating the entire app's, re-rendering the entire app for me. Okay, so now we're actually getting things passed into that task item down below. Now what I want to do is as I add extra things like hi 2 or hi 3, as I get a long list, I actually want to add these up top rather than at the bottom, because eventually they'll be down below the screen, and it's from a UX standpoint, people are like, did I actually enter something in or did it not go in? So what we're going to do now is before we map, I actually want to do a little bit of sorting. So we'll do a dot sort like this, and then do a dot map after that. So to sort, you pass it 2 values, and it's basically going to be the first thing in the list and the second thing in the list, and then the second thing and the third thing. So it'll basically just keep going through all of these and run a check on all of them. So I'm going to do in parentheses here, since I've got 2 things. We'll just call it A and B. That's pretty standard. In fact, you can see that in the little pop-up I get in VS Code. So if I come over here, now what I want is B.id. That's my unique identifier, minus A.id. Now, why am I using the ID? Well, it's because it's actually time-stamped. So in addition to being an ID, it's a timestamp for me. So now, as I refresh here, it'll actually switch these around. And so you'll notice that the last thing I added is now up top because it was created later than the other things. All right, so it'll just loop through all those, and when it's done, it basically passes it off to this map, and now here we go. Now, the last thing I want to do in this section is build out what this task item should look like. We won't actually hook up any functionality quite yet. We'll do that in a second. But for now, I'm going to come over to the task item here, and we want to change this around a bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually make this an LI tag, because again, it's in a UL list. So I want to do that. And then I want to give this a class name. And because I'm going to use the same module, I'm going to call it styles as well here. We'll do styles.task, which again should point to the actual styles.task. So if I come in here and look at this, you see that we've got a .task here, and basically that is what's being applied to this list item. Because I'm using it here and I'm scoping to this exact item, then what I need to do is actually import those same styles here. So actually, let me jump over here, and I'll just grab all this right here. Let's see, I don't need that, just the styles, and we'll paste that in up top here. Now, I'm actually loading this twice, so this is not great practice. You know what? Let's change this up. Let's call this task item.module.css, and I'm going to change this up because that's kind of a dumb idea. All right, so I'm going to say task item.module.css, and in this case, I'm going to remove this tasks here because we don't need that here. That's only for the task list, and then I'm going to remove all this down here because we don't need any of that. All right, I think that should work. Task item.module.css. There we go. And then this should be task item.module.css. So I think that should work. Let me go ahead and just close this down and restart it back up. All right, so it's still not working. Let's see what's going on here. Task item.module.css. Does that thing exist? Well, let's check. All right, if I move this over, dust module, it says copy. well, that would be the problem. Okay, so there we go. And now that should work. Come back over here, refresh. There we go. Okay, so now it's all working and everything is scoped. And all that did is basically mean we weren't importing the style sheet twice and scoping it twice. So we're only importing the styles we need on this task item, and same thing for the task list. All right, hopefully that made sense. All right, so inside here, now I gotta actually scaffold out what this is supposed to look like. So we're gonna have a div with a class name of task group. Now, I'm doing it like this even though we need to scope the styles to show you something. And that is that whenever we have a dash here, because this is essentially passing an object with all of these things as values, just like in normal JavaScript, when you have a name that's like dashed or something like that, you can actually still reference this by using the bracketed syntax. So what I can do is say styles like this, and then a bracketed syntax here for task group. And that's the same as saying dot task group, but because it's a string here, I can pass it in just like that, and that should work. Okay, so now inside here, I've got a couple of things. I've got an input here, and let's go ahead and just move this down like this. And now this input is actually the checkbox itself. So we're going to say checkbox, that's the type here. And if I save this and I add a task over here, hi, you should see now I got a checkbox right there. So what I want is this checkbox here, and then we're going to have several things here. We're going to have whether or not it's checked, and that we're getting from the task itself. So that's task dot, remember the value for that, it's checked. All right, so perfect. We'll actually need to update that in a second, so we'll come back to that. The name, so the name for the input itself is going to be the task.name. That's, again, we're getting from it, and then the ID will be the task.id. And again, that's a unique identifier, but it also allows us to tie this input directly to the label, which we'll do in a second. Finally, we're going to have an on change, so I'll say on change here, and right now we'll just not point that to anything. All right, let me come down below here, and we'll have a label, and this label is going to be for the HTML of, and if I remove this here, I can say task.id. Remember, this HTML4 has to point to the ID. This is the same as saying for in HTML, but because for is a reserved keyword, again, React has to do something a little bit different. So I'll come inside here, and here I want it just to say task.name. That should be the name of the label. Let's comment this out and save it so we can see that come in. There we go. And now what I want to do is actually right here, space this out a little bit more. So let me get rid of that bottom section to give us a little bit more room. We've got the HTML4. The other things we need here are a class name. And here, again, we're going to point it to our module here of styles, styles dot, and in this case, we're going to point it to our label. Now, what we're actually going to do is create our own checkbox. And whenever you tie these two things together, the label and the checkbox, when you click on the hi, it'll actually check this. And you click on this, it'll check it as well. Now, I've got the value of checked set to the task.check, so it's not letting me change that, which, again, we'll do in just a second. But what I want to do is create my own custom one so that it looks a little bit more like the style I've created, but we're still going to use that functionality to trigger whether or not it's checked. So I'm just going to put this, let's put it inside of a paragraph here, and this will have a class name, and again, we're going to point this to our module, styles.checkmark. Now, inside this paragraph, I want to pass it an icon. And again, I'm going to get this from hero icons. Let me come up top here, and we'll just say like library imports. We did this a little bit ago, but we have that React icons library sitting and waiting for us. So what I'm going to do is import here. What we're going to import is check icon from hero React icon solid 24. I think that's right. Actually, I think we're going to do outline. So we'll pull in the outline version. There are outline and solid versions of these. So that's the one I want here. And then what I want to do is come down here, and I'm going to add that in here. So like that. And I am going to actually update a few things here, pass in a few props to this React library import. So I'm going to have a stroke width here. I'm going to pass it 2 to make it just a little bit stronger of a stroke. And then I'm going to pass a width here of 24 and a height of 24. So if I save that, you should see there's actually a little check right there. Now I'm noticing that I'm not getting the styling I'm wanting, and I think it's because I don't actually have a class on the input. So let me come up here, class name. We're going to add one more thing here, and that would be another module reference style, styles.checkbox. All right, there we go. So now it's ready, and if I come and hover, you get this cool little effect. If I check it, eventually once we update this, it should check. So let's work on that check functionality next. What I need is a piece of state that first of all sets the default to whatever I'm getting from the down from above this task, whether it's checked or not checked, but then allows me to update that if I need to. So what I'm going to do is come in here. So I'm going to call this like is checked. And this is just scoped to this individual instance of this component. So we're going to say then set is checked, we're going to get both of these from use state. And if I start to type this, you see it right here. If I hit tab, it should import that automatically, and it does. And I like to leave the React imports at the very top, up above everything else. So there we go. Use state, and I want to set this as the initial value here. That's what you're passing in here. The initial value would be what? It's going to be my task dot checked, right? So whether it's checked or not checked. So by default, it should not be checked. Then what I want to do is decide whether or not it should be checked. And I can do that with a function, and we can run that whenever we change the input type right here. So what I'm going to do is point that to a function here. Let's call it handle a check box change. We'll pass it the E. That's the event that I'm going to get automatically passed on by the browser. And we'll say set is checked to the opposite of is checked. So basically just toggle it back and forth. So now all I need to do is reference this down below here. So on change, I want to point this to that function. And if I click, it should update it. Now it's not. Do you see why? What am I pointing the value to of checked? I'm actually pointing it to the initial value. What I need to point it to now is the is checked value, which is my state for this particular instance of this component. So now you can see it showing. I can now remove it, put it back. If I click on the label, that should work just as well. And if I were to add extra ones like hello or whatever, now this one is separate. It's a separate instance, so it keeps track of its state separately. Pretty cool, right? Okay, so great. So we got that set and ready to go. Everything should be set on that. Now what we need to do is add these buttons over this way. And just below this first div that had a task group styles, we're going to add a second one that actually has the same thing. So we'll say div like this, and then I want to add a class name. Here we're going to point this to styles, and once again using bracketed syntax, task group. And what we're going to do is pass in two different buttons. So we'll have a button here, and I could break these out into their own components, but for now we're going to leave it like this. This button, we need to give a, let's space this out once again, class name. We're going to point it to our button, which is a global style that we set originally because it's used in a bunch of different components. And then I want it to have an ARIA label because it's not going to have any text, so I need to say what it actually does. And in this case, I actually want to pass it a template string because we want this to be dynamic. So this first button is going to be an edit button. So we'll say update, and then let's pass it the task.name task, something like that. So if it's like update hi task or hello task or whatever it happens to be. So that's what it would read out for screen readers and assistive technology. Then we want to set an on click, and eventually we're going to pass this a function. So for now, let's just kind of put it there as a placeholder. All right, now inside here we want an icon, and I want it to be a pencil icon. So I'm going to come up top here, copy this down. I'm going to look for a pencil icon right there. All right, we'll copy this in, and it should be pretty similar to up above. Let's see, where was that? My plus one, my check icon right here. There we go. And I'll paste it in right here, and then we'll just change out pencil icon. And I don't think I updated the stroke width, just the width and the height. So there we go, shows right here, perfect. And I can actually tab over to it, and it has all my custom button stylings as well. So that's the first one we need to create, and then we need to create a separate button as well. This second button is going to have one more style applied to it, and this will give me a chance to show you how to combine modules and global styles as well. So I'm going to come in here. The first thing I'm going to do is actually wrap this in some kind of templating because we're going to use templating. And I'm going to add this as backtick so that I can do a template string. And here I'm going to add my styles.delete. So in other words, I'm getting this button class from my global style sheet and this from my module. And I can combine the two so that it has both of those on it. Now here, what I want this to say is delete. Delete task name task. So like delete hello task or whatever. We're going to have an on click as well. That one's going to be hidden for now. This is going to be a trash icon, and I can react or hit tab to pull that in up top. Here we go. I just want this to be outline, I think. In fact, I think there's a different pencil icon I like. Pencil icon, pencil square icon. Let's try that one. All right, pencil icon right here. Yeah, I like that one more. Okay, so now we got both of those set and ready to go. I should be able to come in here. Both of those hover states work. This custom color is being pulled in from the module, but other than that, it has all the default styles of a button. Okay, so that is all set and ready to go. Now we need to add some functionality, and we'll do that in the future videos here where we add the functionality for editing and deleting. So we'll actually do that in the reverse. So the next section will be a short section on just adding this delete functionality, and then we'll do another one for the editing functionality. All right, we are now ready to delete tasks, and I actually want to challenge you to see if you can do this yourself. Now think about what you're going to need. The tasks live at what level of the component structure? In fact, if I were to pull this up over here and pull up this components right here, what level do the tasks live at ultimately? Well, they live at this app level. So what does that tell you about where you need to write the function that's going to delete a task from that list? All right, go ahead and try it yourself, and then I'll be right back with you in 2 seconds. All right, hopefully you had a good go of that. What I'm going to do is come down here, and what we need is to pass something to this delete button right here that will run a function. So what we're going to do is write that in our app level because this is where the tasks live. So I'm going to come up top here, and let's see, we've added a task. Now let's do delete task. And we're going to take in something that's unique that we can use to identify that task. What's unique? Well, it's our ID. So let's take that in. So let's set the tasks here. And what I want to do is I want to update just one value by removing it. Now, again, because this is a reference value, I need to pass it the previous state to start with. So we'll do that. And then on the other side of this, what I want to say is that I want to have the previous state dot filter. So this is going to produce basically a new array, a copy of the array, because it doesn't mutate the original array here. What I'm going to do then is say I want to return this filter, and what is the thing I want to check? Well, we could call this a task or something like that. Let's just call it T just to keep it real simple. And then we'll say whenever T.ID does not equal the ID that was passed in. Now that triple equals is just the way my font sets this out, but it's just a bang with 2 equals like that. So it's checking it, and then it combines the the 3 of them to look like that. So if I save this, I need to now get this somehow down to my app component. Well, we can use something called prop drilling to do that. So first of all, I need to pass it down to this custom form. So let's go ahead and space this out, or not the custom form, the task list. So let's come in here, let's take the tasks, we'll put those down. In fact, what we should do is maybe wrap this like this, just to make it a little bit more readable. We'll take this all the way down here and do that closing parentheses. And then inside here, let's pass in this other function. So we'll say delete task. We need to give it the function delete task. Now what I'm going to do is come over here to my task list and take this in as a second prop. So delete task, but this is not where I need to delete things. I actually need to pass this down to the task item. So delete task like that. Now I need to come into my task item, and I need to receive that inside this, this component. So let's say delete task, and I'm going to pass this all the way down to my button down here. So the delete button right here, on click, what do I want to do? But I want to run delete task. Now, because I need to pass it an ID, I actually need to do a little bit more than this. What I want to do is whenever I click on this to then run a function that gives it that ID. So what I can do is write an arrow function right inside here and pass it delete task and pass it the task dot what? ID. That's right. So here I am over here. If this worked correctly, I should be able to look at this state. So let's do that. Let's open this up. I'll click this just to make sure we're looking at the tasks. It's the only piece of state we have up top, but it is, so perfect. So I'm going to come in here and click that, and now you see it removed that exact one. And notice how I have high that's now moved up in its place. And if I check this, by the way, just notice that this should go to, eventually, should go to true. Come on, help me out. Oh, you know what? We haven't handled that. We haven't handled that. We just handled it in the UI. But if I click this, it should delete it, and now it's gone. If I come back in here and add like task, and then I come in here and delete it, it gives it that ID. And this, again, what it's doing is it's taking this right here. Whenever I click, it's then running a function that then passes it the ID. If I did it just like this, then as soon as the component mounted, it would just fire automatically. So it would delete it basically immediately. And I don't want that. It's just whenever I click it, then I run this function. So I run this function, it passes it up to its parent, which is task list. Task list then passes it up to its parent, which is this app. App takes it and says, hey, I've got one of those. And it runs the function it's got. It points it to it. It updates the state. So that's what we're doing. Next, what we're going to do is worry about updating the checked and non-checked status. All right, so in lesson 4, we worked on deleting an item. Now we're going to work on updating the checked status of the item in the state. So what we're going to do is write another little function. And if you want to actually take a second here, if you didn't get the last one, this is going to be very familiar to it. So try this as another test. See if you can do this one by yourself. All right, once you're back, here we go. So we're going to write another function. We're going to call this update. How about just like toggle task? And then we're going to pass it, again, an ID. And in this case, what do we want to do? Well, we want to update just that one ID. So once again, let's say set tasks. And here we want to take in the previous state. And again, you can name this whatever you want. And then what I want to do is take the prev state dot map. And this time I want to map over every single item in the state. And what I want to do is take in the task If I can get rid of all these pop-ups, so we'll say task here. And what I want to do is say task.id. If it's equal to the ID that was passed in, then what I want to do is update just the checked state of that task. So the way I can do that is we're going to make this, let's make this a little easier to read. So let's come down here. We'll say if that's equal to the ID, we'll space it out down here. Then what I want to do, and this is a little ternary, so on the positive, if this is true, I want to take that object and I want to spread in all the properties of whatever that task was. And that would be the ID, the check status, and the name of the item. Then what I want to do is update just the checked property on that object. And I want to update it to the opposite of whatever t.checked is right now. So the task.checked is. So if it is the exact same as the ID I pass in, then go ahead and update just the checked property on that object. If it's not, so this would be the other side of the ternary, then simply just return the task. All right, so hopefully this makes sense. What we're doing is toggling the task. Whenever we run this function, it's going to give us an ID. We're going to take the previous state. We're going to say, hey, start with this. Then what I want to do is I want to take the previous state and map over it. And I want to take the task, so each of the items in the array, in this case it would be each task, and I want to look, does the task.id equal the ID that I passed in? If so, update its check status to the opposite of whatever it was. If it's not that one, then simply just return it as the task. So that should work. If I come over here and take this toggle task, we now want to pass this down just the same as we did before. So I'll take this in here and we'll add it in like that. Then I'll come over to my task list and I need to take this in as a prop. And we need to pass it down. So let's pass it down. Same kind of thing. We're going to pass it to the task item. And now the task item takes it in one final time. Task item right here. Okay. Now, where do we actually run this? Well, you'll notice that we already have the UI setting whether or not it's checked. So this would be a great place to also update the state as well. So all I have to do is come in here and say now toggle task, and I want to pass it the ID of the thing that was clicked on. Now, because this is an individual component here, and it's keeping track of its own ID, its own name, its own checkbox status, all that kind of stuff, I can just pass it, let's see, task.name, right? So if I do that, and I come over here, let's actually come over here and say hi, and we'll add that. And let me come up top here, make sure we've got the state visible. So this checked false, that's what we're looking for. If I come in here and check this, it should not only update the UI, which would be right here, but it should also toggle that state. And nothing happens. Let's see. I passed it the task.name. It needs to be an ID. Okay, hopefully you caught that already. If I come over here, I start to check this. It should update this to true, maybe? No? All right, we got a little bit more debugging to do. Oh, there we go. Okay, I just had to refresh maybe, or wait a second. Here we go in the app. The state should be true. If I uncheck it, it should be false. Okay, there we go. So now it is all working. Next, we're going to work on the actual edit functionality, which is going to involve popping up a little module and all this kind of stuff. So it's going to have a little bit more involved in it. But let's jump into that next section. All right, we're in lesson 6, and just a reminder that if you ever get stuck, you can always go to the GitHub link in the description and grab the right code for whatever lesson that we're on. All right, so I've got this up and running here, and what we need to do now is optionally show a section in the app. So if I come back over here, what I want to do is whenever I have clicked, if I come back over here and type, whenever I've clicked here, can I get rid of all this? Okay, whenever I've clicked here, I actually want to optionally show a section in the entire app component that is basically over the top of everything else. So what I want to do is add that in, let's do it, I don't know, somewhere right in here. So let's say like edit form is what we're going to pass in. Now, I don't want this to show all the time, so we'll figure out how to hide that in a second. But for now, we actually need to create this edit form. So before it yells at us, let's come over here and let's go ahead and copy this custom form and do edit form like that, because it should be very similar. If I come over here, I'll save that. Now I'm going to come up top here. Let's see. Let's get rid of this task list, the task item, custom form, come over to the app. Okay, so I've just got my app and my edit form open. Let's go ahead and copy this down here. And then I'll update both of these with Command D, edit form. All right, so now it should pull in, and now you see you've got 2 of these forms. I obviously want to update the edit form a touch, so let's do that. So I'm going to come over this way, and let's update a few things about this. To start with, I want to update this custom form name, so I'll do Command-Shift-L. That will grab all of those on the page, and just do edit form. And basically that should update that, and it should update this export down below. Okay, so now at least it's actually called what it is, which is good. Next, I know I don't want this add task. I won't need that. And see, I will need a handle form submit, but I won't need any of this here. So let's get rid of that as well. Now, when it comes to this state, I don't need a task and a set task. I'm going to update these instead to say something like updated task name. So that should be updated task name and set updated task name. And I'm going to get that from whatever edited task I pass in. So this is going to take in some kind of task that will then be updated. So eventually we're going to pass in a piece of state here called edited task. So I'll grab that here in a second. But for now, what we need to know is that this will be just a task that lives in our task list. So it should have all our properties, our name, our ID, all that kind of stuff. So the edited task name starts as the edited task dot name. All right, too much edited there, but hopefully that made sense. And now what we're going to do is eventually we want to update that. But what we're going to do next is come in here to the form itself. And I'm going to wrap all this form actually in another div. And if I do Command-Shift-P, I can search for wrap with abbreviation. And with Emmet here, I can just type in that I want this to be, let's see, just a div, I think, right? I think that's what I had. Okay, so if I come up top here, now it's a div, but I want to give this div a couple special properties. So I'm going to give this the role of dialogue, and this should actually engage some CSS that I've written ahead of time. And then I also want to pass it an aria labeled by. So we'll say aria labeled by, and we're going to pass this edit task. In other words, it's saying, hey, here's what the dialogue is about, and it's going to point to the title, in which case will be this edited task right here. So I'm going to actually update this as well to say edit task, and that also means I need to update the label HTML to point to edit task. So those two things are tied together, and now when this dialogue is announced, we know that it's labeled by the task item right here, this input. Now to make all this a little bit easier to read, let's go ahead and space this out here. And I'm going to add one more thing that we'll come back to, and that is an on-click event. Normally don't do on-click events on divs, but we need to do it in this case because we need to decide if we've clicked off of it to know whether or not we can close it. So we'll do that in a second. All right, let me come back down here. Let's check and just make sure everything else is still working. This should have a class of to-do, handle form submit. That all works. We're going to update what that does here in a second for this one. Let's see, this one down here, this should be updated task name, right? And this should be set updated task name. Now in this case, this enter task should be update task, right? And same thing here, so update task. And that should all work. Let me come down here, and we're going to change this aria label as well. We'll say update. Actually, let's actually make this a template string, I think. So inside here, inside backticks, I'll simply say confirm edited task to now read, and then let's pass in the updated task name. This should be a type of submit. The only thing I'm going to do is change this from a plus button now to a check icon. So I'll say check icon, and that should import that up top. If I hit tab, and I'm going to change the stroke width here, stroke width to 2, and then I'll set the height to 24 and the width to 24. Okay, so that should all work. In fact, let me come up top here, make sure, yeah, I've got the check icon coming in and the plus icon. I just need the check one. I think the rest of that should actually work. So let's come up top here and let's think about this handle form submit next. Now we know we're going to need at least two items. We've got the edited task we know we need to pass in, and then we also are going to need to be able to update that. So we're going to write a function called update task. And this is going to be the thing to actually update the task inside of this handle event. So for now, we're just going to comment that out and know that that will be coming in eventually. So this parent of this edit form is the app itself. So let's come up top here, app form, and let's see, edit form should be showing right here, and it is. All right, let me come over here and see we've got a problem. Edit form, properties, reading none. Okay, so what it's doing is it's looking for the things I said I passed in, and I didn't pass them in yet. So calm down, we're going to do that. So we said we were going to pass in an edited task here, which should be edited task, which we'll need to create up top. And then we also said we were going to pass in an update task, which needs to be update task. Now, if I save it, nothing should change because we still have errors because we haven't created these things. So we need this piece of state here. Let's come up top here and let's do the same thing. We'll copy this down and I'll hit Command D to grab both of those and just change that to edited task and set edited task. And by default, it's just going to be, I guess, let's just make it like a null. Now we're also going to have a delete task or an update task. So let's actually use this toggle task as a template, and I'll say update task. And in this case, I actually want to pass it the entire task because I need to have reference not just to the ID, but to the new name. So I need both the ID and the name, and so I might as well get the check status while we're at it. So I'm going to take in a task here instead, but I do have a previous state, and I'm going to map over those, and I am going to see if the t.id is equal to, in this case, the task.id, because I passed in the entire task. Now I just want this property here. Now, if it is, I want to update not the check status, but the name. So I'm going to say name equals, and then in this case, what we're going to do is take in our task.name. So whatever the new task is that's being passed in will be the new name for that object in the array here of tasks. Now, like I mentioned, this gets a little bit more advanced because what we're going to do next is come over here. We're going to close the edit mode. So we haven't yet opened it because right now it's just by default already showing there. So let's kind of put that as a placeholder. Maybe let's even say to do. All right, that way I've got a to do extension that will call that out for us. All right, so let's think about the task itself that's being edited. I've got an edited task right here that I say I'm passing in to my new edited form, but where is this being updated? Well, it needs to be updated whenever the item has been clicked. So that's what I need to actually do next. Let me come over here and refresh. Let's see if we're still getting a problem. Well, that's actually because of this edited task. It doesn't have anything on it right now. It's just an empty string, and it's trying to read it. So before we freak out too much about that, let's actually run over to the task item itself, because here's where we're going to need to actually update. When we click the edited button, we need to update what is the item being edited. So right here is where we need to actually update. All right, so I commented that out. Let's go ahead and say when we click this, so just like, let's see, what do we do this with? The delete task too? We don't want to run it right away. Just when we click it, we want to run a function. And that function we're going to pass in here, we're going to call enter edit mode. And we're going to pass it the task itself. So this would be the task with the ID, its name, all that kind of stuff. All that will be passed in together. So we've got all this, enter edit mode. Now we need to pass this down our prop drilling system. So enter edit mode right here. Then I need to go to the task list, and let's open this up, and we'll also take this in here from its parent eventually and pass this down to where we said we took it in. Then we'll go up to the app itself, and we'll do the same thing. So down in here, we need to pass it enter edit mode and enter edit mode. So now all that's getting passed down, let's actually write something here then that says const enter edit mode. All right, so right here, we know we're going to take in a task. And what I want to do is do a couple things, but the important thing is to set the state of the thing being edited. Remember, that's kind of why we're getting this error in the first place. So I need to actually pass in this set edited task to the task itself. So I'll say set edited task to the actual task that's being passed in, which is this right here. All right, so once I do that, it should actually update for me, and it should be able to set this when we click on enter edit mode. So that's set and we're good to go. The only problem is we haven't actually invoked this function, which means we're still getting this error. So I want to actually only show this edited form optionally. So I need one more piece of state to decide basically whether or not we're in edit mode. And that's a piece of state we're just going to call is editing. So I'm going to come up top here and let's add one more piece of state up here. And here we're going to grab both of these and change this to is editing and set is editing to now we're going to start it to false. That means I can come down here and I can optionally show this section. So just like I did with our tasks, I said only when is editing or tasks are true, then do the task list. I can do the same thing here. So I'm going to just say is editing. Whenever that's true, then, and let's just surround all this, this component here and return that here. So we'll say then go ahead and show this. So right now it should get rid of everything. If I come in here and say like hi, and then I click on this edit button, what should happen? Well, remember we've passed down this enter edit mode to the task list and then down to the task item. And when that is checked, if I come all the way down here, it should say enter edit mode and pass it the task. That is going to fire the function up here, enter edit mode, where it sets the edited task. But I also need to now say set is editing to true, right? To actually show that it's editing, which means that form should show for me. So let's come in here and I'm going to click here and there we go. Edited task, it's already highlighted, we're ready to go, and now the component is showing. Now, currently I don't have any way to actually change anything, so if I try to click out, nothing's going to work, so I'm going to have to refresh and hit hi again. Okay, so now at least everything is showing as we expect. Now we gave ourselves a to-do up top, and I'm going to give ourselves one more here, which is to-do set focus back to original, and don't worry, we'll get back to that in a second. So close the edit mode here. That's what we need to do next. So I'm going to actually just run from here, close edit mode, which will be a function that we write. And let's see, let's come down here and say const close edit mode. And this is just going to be an arrow function. This is going to do two things. It's going to set is editing to false. And eventually we're going to return focus to the previous state. So this is what I mentioned a second ago. So a previous state focus, something like that. And that's a UX UI thing we'll get to in a second. So I want to click close edit mode whenever I'm done editing the task. That editing happens right here in this update task. So let's come back here, and actually I need to click this, and I can say like hi to, and now I should be able to submit either by clicking on this or hitting the enter, and it should submit it and close it down. But it doesn't, and I wonder why. Well, the first thing let's do is come over here. Let's make sure that the components here are actually getting an updated item. So if I come over here, we look at the state, and we look here, we should have a name on here. Hi, okay. So if I come in here and I update this, nothing is being updated. So we know at least something isn't quite working properly. So let's come back over here to updated task. Let's look at where that's passed down. It's passed down here to the edit form. So let's jump into the edit form. All right, and update task. So we never actually fired this. Well, that would make sense. It's not updating the task. Let me come back over here and look what we need in our update task. So if you ever need to go to where it's defined, you can hold down the control or command on Mac. I'm not sure what that is on Windows. And you can either preview it there or click and it'll take you to where it was defined. In this case, I need to pass in the entire task. Okay, so let's come back over here. Let me close those down and let's pass in the entire, nope, not there. Here, pass in the entire task itself. All right, so now let me come over here. We'll have hi, and I've got some state down here. And what I want to do is just make sure that as I update this, that it actually updates the state. 2, 3, is that working? So now it did properly shut it down, but it did not update the state. So let's look back at our update state, update task right here. Okay, so I'm mapping through this task, and I'm saying if the task t.id, so the task I'm looping through has the same ID as the task.id, then go ahead and update the name to the task.name like that. So that should be working. Let's try one more time. Let me just refresh, come over here, hi, click on this, 2. Well, let's just save it and see if it changes. No, it does not. All right, so because I think that should be working, let's come over here. We know we've got the update task right here where it's updating that actual task itself. But all of that is based on whatever task that we've set to editing. Let's see, right here, this edited task itself. So if I go back here, up here, you see by default it's null. And then whenever I click the edit button that allows us to enter edit mode, it should set right here, set edited task to the task. So why don't we just pay attention to this right here? So let's pay attention to that is edited task, and or not is edited task, the edited task right there. I'm tired of saying edited. I come in here and I click hi. Let's see, right here, this is what I'm still looking for. When I click here, it should update, and it does, so that's good. Let's see what happens if I type in here. Is that getting updated? No, it's not. So that's another problem because this should be updating as we get going. So let me come back and look at this set edited task right here. That's true, but now let me move down into the custom form, and I should have a piece of state here, which is the task name. And as I update this, nothing is being updated. So it looks like we've got a little bit more work to do with that state. So if I come down in here, let's see, we've got the updated task name. Am I ever setting the updated task name again? I am down here, so that's good. All right, now notice what I'm actually passing in. I'm passing in the updated task name rather than, or the task rather than the updated task name. So that would make sense. So what I need to do is actually pass in everything from the task, but then just update the name property. So let's grab the edited task, the first thing that was passed in, and I'm just going to update the name property to now point to update task name. All right, so I think that should take care of our problems. Let's come back in here. We'll add some kind of name. If I open up the DevTools again, here we go. So what am I looking at? I'm looking at this state. Oh, I refreshed it. Something. All right, so this state right here. And I would just want to make sure that this name is updating, which it should be passing up through this update task function. So if I come in here and click this and I start to type, something should be happening. And you know what? It shouldn't update until I do that. So it should just be on the custom form. Yeah, right inside here. Okay, so as I type on the edited form, there we go. The state of this is updating, which should be the updated task name. So now if I click, this should be updated. Okay, perfect. So everything's updated. Hopefully that made sense. So what we're doing is, let me walk you through that again, since I kind of got stuck on it. So when we click on this, what we're doing is we're passing in this entire task as the new edited task. We're passing that to the edited form when we click on that button. So when that happens, it actually enables showing this edited form that then receives this task and the function to update it. And what it does is as you type, it has its own custom kind of like localized scope here, that state here that updates this updated task name. Whenever you actually submit the form, then it's going to fire this event. It prevents the default form from submitting. Then it updates the task by passing in an entire task, which is whatever the updated task was with a new name to it. When we get that, if I come over here to updated task and I keep clicking, let's see, over here, updated task right here, and then takes that task and it updates the state, the global state of all of our tasks with the new name by passing the name right here. All right, and then it closes down the edit mode, which is great. Now let's go ahead and think about a couple kind of quality of life improvements, and let's start with these to-dos. All right, so I mentioned previous state focus, back to original state focus, all that kind of stuff. So what I need to do is actually have some kind of state that tracks which item was clicked on, because typically if you have a modal like this and you close down, you want the focus to return to the button that you click to open it. That's just good UX. So if I click in here, I click here, I want it to return here. So what I need to do is have some kind of state that tracks what the thing was that was the focused item when I open the edit form to start with. So let's remove this to do right here. And I'm going to write a piece of state. We're going to call it like set focus. How about set previous focus L or something like that for the focus element. We're going to set this to document.active element. So this should grab the active element that was clicked when we entered edit mode, which was that edit button. Now I actually need to create this piece of state. So let's do that. Let's come up top here and right like this. I'm going to grab both of these here and set this just for right now to, let's see, null I think works just fine. So now we've got the set previous focus and the set. I don't need that. So what I need is previous focus right here and set previous focus L. All right, so previous focus L should be the thing that's updated whenever we click on this button. Now I can actually return the focus to that when I close it down. So where's that close? Right here. So I'll come in here and I can just say my previous focus L now needs to be dot focused. And again, this is just standard JavaScript at this point. I'm just saying focus on the previous L. So if I come in here and I add something here and I go to edit it, it should set the item that needs to be focused after this is closed to the item that I clicked on, which is that edit button. So if I click here, it should refocus that, and it does not do anything. Okay, so let's see what's going on here. Let's first of all just make sure that that state is all coming in properly. So if I come in here and I start to type on this app, I should have lots of pieces of state. The one I want to know about is this previous focus L. So if I click on here, that should update to this button, and it does. If I click here, it should return focus to it, and it looks like it did, but I'm not seeing it visually. Let's try one more time. I'm going to click on here, and when I click off, now I'm going to just come into the console and say document.active element, and this should be the edit button. Okay, so it is. So for whatever reason, it's not showing the focus state on that, but I'm totally fine with that as long as it actually is returning focus there so that you're not losing it, especially if you're using assistive technology. You understand kind of where it is in the DOM. So you clicked on here, and when you click off, you return to there. All right, perfect. So that works. Now we also need to handle a couple other things. So if I click outside of here, I want it to close down and not update it, even if I have stuff in here. And if I hit the escape key, I want the same thing to happen. So where are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do that in our edit form over here. So let me come down here. And in addition to this function we write in the state, I also am going to use another hook called use effect. So let me go ahead and pull that in here. So we're going to say use effect like this. And if I come over here and hit tab, it should import it up top, and it does. But we can just pull these both in at the same time, and I can get rid of all of that. Okay, so what I want to do with this use effect is it takes a function here as its first argument, and then as the second argument, it takes an array of items that will basically run this again. Now, the use effect hook runs as soon as you open the app or mount the app itself. So it's going to run once at first, and in that case, what I want to do is I actually want to set an event listener. So I'll say window.add event listener, and I just want to listen for a key down event. And I want to pass it a function called close modal if escaped or something like that. All right. So this will be my function. And I'm going to actually write this inside the use effect just up above. So I'll say const set modal, close modal, whatever that's called. We'll just make this again an arrow function. And I'll say if the e.key, because I'm going to get the event, which will have the key property on that, if that equals escape, Then what I want to do is I want to close edit mode. So close edit mode. Now I don't actually have this function in here. So what I need to do is actually pull this down through the app itself. So I'll do that. I'll come in here. And now in this edit form as well, I need access to that close edit mode. Now when I do that, because I've already know that the only way that I've entered edit mode is by setting the previous focus cell, it should set is editing to false and update this, but it's not actually going to update the task. That's done separately. That functionality is kept to its own function. So I'm going to come back over here. So I know that it's going to add this every single time that this component mounts. Now, if I just leave it at this, technically this would work. If I come in here and I add something high, come over here, and then I click escape, come over here, click escape. Now that works every single time, which is great. However, we got a problem. And that is if I come in here to my sources, I think. Nope. Console. Nope. Elements. Event listeners. Here we go. All right. If I come down here to key down, notice I've got all of these window key down events. And every time I click this, I'm getting more. They're just more and more adding. I think they add them to the top maybe. I don't remember. But anyhow, it's adding more and more each time. I think maybe I have to refresh. Maybe that's the problem. Oh, well, if I refresh, it loses it all for now. So what I want to do is actually be able to remove that when I've actually closed it. So we can write another thing. This is called like a cleanup function here, where I return here whenever this use effect unmounts. So whenever this edit form is off the page, now I just want to remove that event listener. So I'll say remove event listener, and I'm going to remove the key down. And the function I'm going to remove is that close modal if escaped. So now if I return and do the same thing, hi one, come over here. Let's open up these event listeners. Let's see. Yeah, right here. Well, it's not showing it to me. I think, because when I close it down, it's not going to show it anymore. So let me try one more time. Come over here, H1, open this up. It should have attached an event listener. Come over here. There we go. The window event listener is here. And now when I close it down, it should remove it. And if I were to move away, let's see, for some reason it's not updating this for me. Maybe I just have to click that. Yeah, there you go. Now it's gone, which is what I want. Hey, real quick, this is Editing Chris here, and I just realized that I forgot something in this video, and that is that as you're building this out, I mentioned there are two things you can put inside this use effect that you have to put inside it. One of them is a function, and then the second thing is an array of dependencies. Now, we have actually passed in a dependency from the outside. Can you see what it is? It's that close edit mode. So that actually needs to go right inside that array. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And if you do that as well, we'll all be up to date. And I'll update the code in the GitHub to follow. All right, thanks. Back to the lesson. So hopefully that makes sense why we had to do it that way, why we're closing it down that way. Now we have one more thing, which is on click. How do we close it down? Remember, we have this little section here for this on click function. And here I can just write an inline function where I take in the event, which is the click itself. And then all I'm going to do is say if e.target, so that's the thing that was clicked on, if that equals the dialog, the e.current target. The difference between these two, target like that. The difference between these two is e.target is the thing that was clicked on, even if it's not the thing the event listener was on. So in other words, anything inside of this div technically would fire this on-click event, all right, because of event propagation. Now what we're going to do is actually check if it's the actual dialog itself. So if it is the dialog, which is the outside wrapper, it's like the backdrop to the actual form. If it is that dialog, then I want to close the edit mode. And again, I'm going to run the function only when it's clicked, like that. So now if I come over here and I open this up and I click off, that should work the same as if I hit the escape. And notice that even if I update stuff, it doesn't actually update this until I click submit. So if I click off, now it's just lost that altogether. Hopefully that makes sense how we handled all that, why we did it the way we did it. And now we've got lots of different options here. So we can add new tasks like this. We can check them off, which is great. We can update tasks and add a new name. And that updates, we can delete the task, and that deletes it. So what do we have left? Well, we have at least one thing left, which is we want to actually separate all this logic out and save it somewhere so that when we come back to refresh the page, we can actually get access to our tasks. So we don't have to re-enter our tasks in every time, or if we reload the page, it can retain our tasks that we've already added, updated, deleted, and edited. All right, so that's the next lesson. All right, we are now at lesson 7, and if you need help at any time during this lesson or any of the other ones, again, remember you can grab the code from the description. We've got it so far where everything is working properly, which is great, but when we refresh, everything goes away. So we want to actually find a way to save all this to local storage. So I'm going to come over to my app component here, And at the very top, what we're going to do is look at how we get our tasks. So to start with, every single time we remount the app or refresh the app, it's going to actually set our tasks to an empty string. So this is what we need to update. We need to actually pull this stuff from local storage. Now we can write it just for this instance, but eventually in the next series, I'm going to show you how to add some theming to your site as well, and that's going to pull from local storage as well. So we can actually write our own hooks that will reuse the same logic, but we can just pass in different prompts to it or different arguments to it. So in this case, that's what we're going to do. Or we're going to write our own hook. We're going to call it use local storage. So I'm going to say use local storage. And we're going to have two things that you have to pass into this hook, one of which is going to be the name of whatever you want it to be. So in this case, we're going to have the key, the name, be React ToDo.tasks, something like that. The second thing will be the initial state. In this case, it will be just that empty array. So if there is nothing, then just set it to this empty array. Now, if I save it here, I'm going to get yelled at. So let me come over here, and before it starts yelling, let's add a hooks folder. And inside this hooks folder, I'm going to create a file called use local storage like that, .jsx. All right, and right now this doesn't do anything, so we'll have to come back to that, but at least it's operational. So let's come back to our app. Where is it? Right here. And let's import this. Let me close this down. So up top here, let's see. Let's do custom hooks. And here I'm going to say import use the local storage. And then this should be from .hooks. And then it should be use local storage. Okay, so that should pull everything in properly. Now, by default, it's going to set it to nothing still, which is great. But what we want to do is be able to actually update that state as we get going. So I'm going to come over here to use local storage. And here's where we'll actually write our functionality. Now, I'm actually going to export a function just like I do in any other file in React, any other component. So that will be called use local storage. And this is going to take in two things. Remember, it had a key and it had an initial value. So you can name those whatever you want. Those are just what I'm going to name them. And then inside here, up top, before we return anything, we're actually not going to return JSX. We're going to return the two things we need. And if we come over here, the two things we need are our tasks and a function to update our tasks. So maybe actually let's go ahead and just return those so we kind of have those mentally set. So we're going to return our, in this case, we're just going to call it a value and a set value. Now, I'm not naming these tasks because I want to reuse this for other things like our theming. So I want the value to be whatever that is. So it might be, I don't know, it could be color and set color, something like that. But when I destructure these, I can name them whatever I want. But in here I can keep them kind of generic, and that's what I want to do. So I want to return those two. So here what I want is a function. So we're having a function here, and this is going to actually have a use state itself. So we're going to pull two things in from use state, which is going to be a value and a set value. So these two things we're going to return from set or use state right here. If I hit tab, it should import those, and it does. And here I'm not going to actually pass in like a value, like a string or an array or something like that. I'm going to pass in a function. So this function basically will allow me to return what I want down here. So what function do I want? Well, if I come inside here, I want to look inside the local storage. So let's just call it const local value. I'm going to set this to my window.local storage.get item. And what item do I want to get? Well, I want to get the key that I passed in. So like React to do or whatever that happens to be. So it's going to look and say, is there anything in this location? Then if there is, I'm going to say return the local value like that. If that exists, then I want to return json.parse, because remember, whatever gets sent to the local storage is sent as a string. So I've got to parse that back into JSON. We'll say local value. And then if there's nothing there, then I just want to return the initial value, which in this case was just that empty array that we would have passed in this particular use case. So that's what I'm going to return. Now, there could be an error, so it's always a good idea to wrap this in like a try catch. So we'll say, we'll try that, and then if there is an error, so we'll take in an error right here, so we'll catch the error. And if that's the case, I'll just console.log the error, and then I'll return the initial value. So it won't break the app. It'll basically just return it as if there was nothing there in the first place, which I'm assuming there isn't if there was some kind of error. Now, there's actually one other thing I want to do here, because all this is going to do is look inside here, and there's going to be nothing in here, but we have yet to really save it anywhere. And I can use this local storage hook to save as well. So what I want to do is come in here, and after I've gone ahead and seen if there's anything in here, then what I'm going to do is say, let's use a use effect. We've used one of these hooks before, but this use effect will run once when the component mounts, or in this case, when the hook is invoked, and then once anytime anything in our dependency array is updated. Now, we didn't have a dependency array in the other one we used, so I'll have to explain that a little bit here. So this function is going to run once immediately. So the first thing I want to do is if there is nothing in this local storage, so the first time I run it, there's going to be nothing here. So it's going to come in here and say, hey, there's nothing here, so it's just going to send back this initial value. So let's come down here. What we're going to do is look at the window.location.setItem. What I want to do is set the key, so that's the name of it, and that's what we passed in up top. Remember, this is still inside our use local storage hook. Then what I want to set it to is json.stringify to turn it back into a string, and I want to pass in the value itself, which is whatever was set right here, all right, this value. Now, the very first time this runs, it's just going to set this as an empty string. In fact, if I were to come over here and open this up, I'm going to get yelled at because this should be local storage, like that. Okay, so now if I refresh, if I come over here and look in this application, you'll now see that I've actually already gotten something written to here. So what happened is when it first mounted this hook, when it first invoked this hook, what it did is it said, hey, here's the key, which is React to do tasks. We set that in our app right over here. See right here? So this is the first thing we passed in, and that's accepted here as the key. Second thing we passed in was an empty array. So it says, hey, let's use this use state. We're going to try to see if there's anything in the local storage. It looked at that key place to do, and there was nothing there. So instead of parsing it, it just returned the initial value here, right here. So that now means this is set to the value. So this value is now this initial value. So when I come down to this use effect, now this runs, and it looks inside here and it says, hey, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the local storage to the key, which is here, and to whatever value has been returned from this state up here, in which case it's just an empty array. Now what we have to do is we want to make sure anytime that one of two things is updated, this whole use effect hook runs. And in fact, if I were to try to save this and run it in production, it wouldn't work because I'm using two outside values inside of a use effect hook. And whatever you do that, you have to always pass those things in as dependencies. So what are the two things I'm passing in? Well, it's the key and the value. Now the key's not going to change in this case, but if I used this hook for something else, it would keep track of all that stuff separately. So in this case, the key is really never going to change, but the value will. So whenever this value changes right here, this return state, whenever it's different, whenever it looks in here and sees that there's something different in the local storage, it should update that for me automatically. So now what this hook does is it basically will look and retrieve and also save things to our local storage. All we're going to do is pass it a key and a value that will return as if it were a state. So, and it is a state, value and set value, because we're getting that from right here. So we're returning these two things, and they're going to get us this local value and all that kind of stuff. Now we're using that all the time, the set tasks all the time. So whenever we use the set tasks, it's actually going to look back into this local storage and look back into here. And it's going to, again, go through this whole process again and save it to our local storage. So hopefully that makes sense how we set all that up. If I come in here and I now add like hi, you can see that not only does it add here, but it should, sometimes I have to refresh, add it right down here. I guess I can just click this. And if I say, well, actually, let's update this. Let's say like hi 2, and I click this here, I refresh this here, now it says hi 2. And that means if I come in here and refresh, now automatically it's going to keep whatever I originally saved. I can delete this, and if I refresh, now it's going to be gone. I can add more ones again, and just as I continue to add, it's going to continue to add them below. If I refresh, here they are, they all pull in down below. So now this use the local storage, because we use set tasks all throughout, for instance, to add tasks, or to delete tasks, or to toggle tasks, or to update tasks, or to, let's see, anything else? Nope, that was it. Okay, so whenever we've used it, it actually now invokes that hook instead, and that hook allows us to then update this local storage. All right, so that is going to be a completed project for us, but there's something I want to show you before we're done, and that is that I do actually have a dark mode by default. If I click my machine over to dark mode, you see we get this nice, cool effect where it's all in dark mode. Now, you might say, I hate those colors, and because of that, I hate this whole project. Well, I'm sorry for that, but stick around because next project, what I'm going to do is show you how to add some theming to this. The way we set up the CSS allows us to do some pretty cool stuff with theming. And in fact, if I were to come over to my site, you can see I've got a green color. And down below, I can change this automatically from light to dark mode if I want to, in spite of whatever my system says. And right over here, I can actually update the color as well. We're going to do all this in the next project because it's kind of ancillary to the to-do list, but it was pretty fun to do. So I thought it would be fun to share. And notice that if I refresh, it actually saves all of this because all of this is also being saved to local storage using that same use local storage hook. Hey, well, I hope you enjoyed this video and that it was a huge help to you in understanding how React works and how you can interact with things like hooks and components and state and all this kind of stuff. I hope that was a big, big help to you. If you did like it, go ahead and leave a like on the video. I don't mention this much, but if you're interested in supporting the channel, I do have a Patreon, and right now it's basically just a thank you. So if you want to give a thank you for a month or 2 months or something like that, I would appreciate it. But the bigger thing is that you actually learned something. And if you learn something, it's always super encouraging to me to hear that. So just leave a comment below with what you learned, what was helpful for you. And if you have any suggestions, I'm always all ears as well. Hey, well, thanks so much for watching. I will catch you next time. Happy coding.